bass speaker cabinets. The best thing that ever happened to your tone, or a complete waste of money. Metal Bass Monday. All right, welcome back. This week for patrons, if you haven't gotten the alert already, the songwriting seminar is up. I hope you dig that, and I will see you in the comments over there. Again, there's additional content from me expanding on a couple of different ideas, some lessons, materials like that. If you'd like to get that additional content, links to Patreon and Subscribe Star down below. And thanks as always to my patrons. Much appreciated, and a couple more surprises coming up that finally just arrived, and I'm going to show it off to those guys first. And then you awesome people here on the regular channel will get to see it then too. But they get it first. So thank you to all of you. Always appreciate it. So one of the big things that I see a lot is when people talk about their amps, they really go over and talk about speakers and cabinets. And for guitar players, and since a lot of bass players come from guitar, it's an absolute essential. Your cab is always mic'd, and I've argued, and it's really started to become the understood idea that your speaker choice for guitar is actually even more important than your amp. That a lot of amps sound fundamentally the same until they hit those speakers, and that you do more tone shaping by your speaker selection than you even do with what head you use. For bass, not so much. Now, we can do a lot of tone shaping. You know, we have 15s, 18s, 12s, 10s, tons of different tones. However, the problem is, half the time, we don't wind up having anybody in the audience ever actually hear our cabinet. Or it doesn't even make it to the studio recording. Why is that, and why the difference? Well, after the initial systems of big amplification and everything, it started to become more and more the standard that a direct signal would be taken off the bass, sometimes from the amp and sometimes right from the bass. And that got mixed in half the time. So either it was a partial mix along with the mic, or they would just run you direct and EQ you with the board. I hate that with the fury of 1,000 suns. The fact that somebody else utterly determines my sound is just, I can't stand it. Even if, I'm getting part of my idea across or something, never having any idea how this person is interpreting what I want my sound to be like, not this guy. But taking a direct from something like your bass head, which has become more and more common, is becoming something that's, I'd say 90% of the time anymore. It's faster on setups because gigs have become harder and harder. People are carrying less gear. They have less time to load in, get set up, that kind of thing. So they're looking to get up and go. And really when it comes down to it, a lot of times your bass speaker is getting cut out of the signal chain. You're rarely getting mic'd. Your direct is either coming directly from your bass or from your head. And so what is it really doing, if anything? I know we love them, and, everybody knows I love my Mesa 412 over here, and I drag that fridge around with me. But I'll get into that in a minute. I make sure that thing's heard. But I've seen people really spend thousands of dollars on amazing cabinets and everything, and then they go to shows, and the person just plugs that XLR in the back of their head and bypasses it completely. I'm always appreciative that I kind of had an understanding of this early on. I saw a clinic from a bassist named Phil Susan. Used to play for Ozzy, really nice guy and a great bassist. And he was showing some of his gear, and this is way back. I was watching, this clinic when I was really young, and it was recorded before that. And even after talking about his gear, he said, I wouldn't go too crazy with the speaker cabinet, even though I just talked really highly about it. He said, because most of the time you're going to go live direct. And at the time he was touring with Ozzy Osbourne. And he said, really, this cabinet is just a giant monitor for you. No one else is hearing it. And that kind of knocked me back because, I had just started getting into, looking at gear and things. And I went, should I be paying all this money for something that only I'm going to listen to? And what this comes down to is if that's the way you're going to go most of the time, bass cabinets can be irrelevant for a lot of people. I mean, especially if you're doing something like in-ear monitors or you have a good monitor system, if it's coming straight out of your head and you're going to have monitors, the bass cabinet is going to be irrelevant. They're not going to mix it in. They're not going to mic it up. You're going to hear your direct sound out of it. And even with just a good set of floor monitors, half the time that's where your sound's going to be coming from. A lot of times they'll even have you turn down your cabinet almost all the way just so they can put you through the monitors and add you into the mix so you don't overpower things at the front of the PA. So this brings us to an important decision. Is what you do that crucial that you need to do this? And I think you could go down two roads at this point. I used to be on one of them, and now I'm on the other. That is, you can invest in a real major cabinet and just absolutely be that bass player that everybody hates dealing with, but you demand that you get mic'd up. And here's an important part that a lot of people don't think of too, is they'll get this great cabinet. They'll go to the show and they'll go, no, I insist that my cabinet be mic'd. But the problem is they're not choosing the mic. The microphone makes a huge amount of difference too, and half the time they're just going to take whatever they're using for guitars, usually an SM57, and park it in front of your cabinet. As far as I'm concerned, that's death. The SM57 has a high mid spike that you cannot dial out of it, and all those beautiful blooming low end pieces that you've dialed into your sound just went under the table. You're just going to get this nasally honking kind of sound. So if you're going to go out and insist on being mic'd up and really kind of have your rig together and want it used, I would bring my own mic. And I would even position it, this is going to take some time on your part, but position it right where you like hearing it and do a couple recordings or something and find out where on the speaker and which speaker you like it on. And I'm sure you've seen this before, a little box and duct tape or an X or something on somebody's grill cloth with right where they want the mic to go and have them on there. For me, when I used to mic my own cabinet, I actually had it attached to the cab. So it was like on a mounted bracket. And I made it easy for them. Instead of plugging in to go direct, just plug your XLR into the back of my mic. I used to use a Royer 121. Huge amount of low end, really thick, syrupy kind of sounding mic. I dialed it a little bit more high end to compensate for that. Had a beautiful sound out front. So if you are really wanting to use your own cabinet, I recommend that that's the route you take, or it's going to become an irrelevancy and you're basically just lugging around a really heavy and expensive floor wedge that most people aren't going to hear. Now, the other thing that's come up that this is the way I've gone and started shifting to now is the idea of impulses. And that is when you capture the sound of a cabinet and you create a digital file out of it, and then you play your sound through a pedal or something, like I use the AMT Pangea, and that loads that digital file and it sounds like your cabinet. So instead of going direct from your head out to the board, your head, either in the effects loop or before that XLR direct out, has that IR loader. And so when they get the signal, it sounds like the perfectly mic'd version of your speakers. So you're getting a simulation of your full rig that's going out to them. And then you don't have to bother micing your cabinet because what you're hearing and what they're getting out front is exactly the same. And so if you make a sound adjustment on stage, it's going to sound the same exactly out there too, not just through your cabinet. This is the way I've gone. I have, again, the AMT Pangea, and that goes direct out of my pedal board. So that out front, they're hearing exactly everything I do the same way I hear it live on stage. This also means if I want to go and play a show and I can't take my own cabinet, or I just want to go through monitors, or something happens to my cabinet, I can plug up into anything and keep going, and the sound I really want to have happen still goes out to the board. So thankfully, technology's given us this kind of option to be able to mess with. But really, when I see guys talking more and more about these cabinets, and I want this, and I'm going to add this and that, a lot of times I've just asked, is anybody going to hear this? Because that's the big difference between us and the guitar players. Their speakers are essential on stage. Ours usually are just becoming irrelevant. So either get your own mic, practice your own placement, and make that relevant, or go the other way, get the impulse loaded up, and just bypass everything else, or just have the head that you want that sounds perfect direct, and just not be bothered by a somewhat marginal sound on stage if you're going through someone else's speaker cab, knowing that the direct out sounds a certain way. So at the end of the day, it really comes down to money and what you feel the best option to you is. But for a lot of people, I think you're spending a lot of money on bass cabs and they aren't as relevant as guitar cabs are. It's just not a necessary part of our sound unless we choose to make it that. So incorporate that idea into your rig before you start building your tone. I would stress, make yourself less reliant on the speaker. If you have it, great. But if you don't, know that in real life, that it's not going to make a difference that often. The other part being when you go to the studio. Rarely do they mic the bass cabinet. It's almost always the same situation too. They'll have their own preamps, things like that, or you'll carry in your bass head or something. Again, sometimes you'll get a really great engineer who wants to start with your sound and mic it up and see what you can get, or he does both. But sometimes too, they already have a bass chain that they know works well and they're going to adapt to your sound, and you're going to wind up not using that stuff in the studio either. Even guitar players a lot of times show up with their head or something and wind up going with the studio engineer's gear, using even his head or the collection of cabinets he has there already mic'd up. So even recordings, you're probably not going to get that much use out of it unless you force the issue. Take that into account. Realize that no matter how much marketing you're seeing or all the endorsements or all the other players that rave about it, unless you're taking control, unless you're miking it up, and unless you're sending that signal to the board, all that money just went into a glorified monitor. So, be wise with your choices, my friend. It could mean getting another really awesome bass instead. Now, to follow up and wrap up this week's Metal Bass Monday, it was a lot of fun, the conversation last week. If you haven't watched last episode, we were talking about if extended scale and things like 35 are absolutely essential for drop tuning and things, and man, did it seem to kick up some controversy. I definitely had my own opinions, but I'd love to hear from you down in the comments some more. You know, the different solutions, or if you think what I said is bunk, or how brands like Tobias and Zahn and Federa and all this have been making 34 scale 5 strings and 6 strings for ages, and they're highly sought after and all that. And as far as this episode, what's your experience been like live? Do you find it hard to get soundmen to mic up your cab? Do you not care about your cab too much and just go direct? What's your live rig? What's your situation? And even how are you recording? Are you bringing a head in and that's how you're working it and using cab sims inside the DAW? Are you going completely amp sim and just plugging directly into your interface? Really curious to hear how people are getting the job done these days. And remember, as with everything I said about the scale length and what I'm saying now about the mic cabs and all that, there's no one final answer. It's what works for you and how you get the job done and what feels best for you, because it's your music and you got to do what's going to interpret it the best for you. So that's going to do it for this Metal Bass Monday. Again, patrons, check out that songwriting class, and I will see you on the next one.